Senator Kleinpeter on Senate Bill 187. Are you ready?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. This bill, we're trying to clean up some verbiage on the cremation bill that we have. We've had some issues with overdose deaths and bodies being held. So all we're pretty much doing is changing some verbiage. I've worked with the Coroners Association as well as my local coroner's office. Sorry we couldn't do this last week. We had an amendment that we had to do. So I do have an amendment that I need to offer up.
Staff, you go ahead and pass out Amendment 1500. And Senator Kleinpeter, I know you've been working to resolve some issues. We've waited this late to take up this instrument. You've had it on before because you were trying to work with all sides involved. And does this amendment hopefully goes toward some resolution in that? If you want to go ahead and
so
fill us in.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. On the on D, on C it says until the coroner's investigation is completed. After the completion of the coroner's investigation, he may issue a permit for cremation. Upon completion of the coroner's investigation, the coroner shall release the body to the family or friends for disposition in accordance with RS 135715. In any case under coroner's jurisdiction in which the body cannot be released within 30 days of death, the coroner shall notify in writing the person or persons with the right to dispose of human remains under RS 8655 the reasons for any delay in release of the body.
You want to give us just a little background on?
I have.
Yancy, I'll let you start. Thank you.
Generally, just introduce yourself for the record.
My name is Yancy Garan. I'm the Chief Deputy Coroner in West Baton Rouge Parish. I'm the one that contacted Senator Kleinpeter with some concerns. The way the law is written today, Title 13, Section 5716, it states that the coroner has to conduct a necessary investigation once someone goes to the funeral home and requests for permission to cremate. The necessary investigation really consists of three things. First, we have to make sure the person is properly identified. Second, that there are no notarized declarations stating otherwise, that they did not want to be cremated. And third, that there's no suspicious circumstances or reasonable probability of the commission of a crime. Well, if there are no suspicious circumstances, the coroner shall issue the permit. And we know shall being a mandatory language. In Section C, it says if the investigation reveals suspicious circumstances or reasonable probability of commission of a crime, the coroner shall deny the permit. Well, we perform the necessary autopsies. The toxicology is sent to a certified lab. We keep tissue samples, DNA samples. That's what we happen to do. I can speak for West Baton Rouge. In a case where you have a drug overdose, the death certificate is actually going to be listed as an accidental drug overdose. Although that doesn't stop the Sheriff's Department from coming up with a suspect and developing probable cause for an arrest, and it doesn't stop the prosecutors from prosecuting the case as a charged as simple second-degree murder is the way it's going to charge if you distribute or dispense an illegal substance that causes a person's death. So looking at Section C of this section, it's pretty clear that to me that if your investigation reveals a crime was committed, you deny the permit. Well, when you have so many cases of overdose death, that a lot of times it's a burden on the family. They can't afford an expensive funeral. So what they have to do is choose cremation, which is a less expensive method. And by doing that, for us to follow the law, it's to me it's difficult, to tell a family, look, I'm sorry, we have to, according to this statute, we have to deny this permit. And It's hard on funeral homes. It's hard on families. So I think that I wanted some clarity, and I contacted Senator Kleinpeter for some clarity in the statute. I appreciate Dr. Shatanovich being here. We met and we both agreed on there's no opposition from anybody from us on the passing of what we have submitted to help give us clarity and help give the residents of the state some relief. Because in some cases, they may choose to donate the body to science. And if you donate the body's gone. I understand the law was written to protect the rights of a defendant, so, he has the right to due process. If he wants to examine the evidence in a case and the body's evidence, it would, we don't want to rob a defendant of his right to due process. So please help us, get some clarity, and I'll be glad to remain here to answer any further questions.
Okay, and we do. First off, let me ask individuals, do we have any questions on the amendment? No? We have anybody willing to offer up the amendment? Senator McMath offers up Amendment 1500, which puts the bill in the posture of the author's liking. Do we have any further discussion on Amendment 1500? Any objection? Hearing none, that will be adopted. Senator Henry for a question.
The amendment takes away the concerns of the Coroners Association, is that correct?
Correct. The issue was an interpretation of existing law that a few coroners felt it wasn't clear regarding, who could release or hold or not release a body. We've been comfortable, but now I think that the wording that we have gives clarity to folks who needed clarity.
Okay, and Senator Kleinpeter, will you continue to work with
hang
him?
on one second. Introduce yourself.
Pardon me, my name is Dr. Jerry Satanovich. I'm the coroner in Jefferson Parish.
Thank you.
Senator Kleinpeter, as you work with him, if something comes up as the bill continues, you'll continue to work with the Coroners Association to make everything.
Absolutely. We've worked
I'll
well.
move favorable at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Shatanovich is also the president of our Coroners Association.
Okay.
Forgot to mention that, sorry.
There you go. It's okay.
Sometimes I try to forget.
We don't have any further lights, but we do have some cards wishing to speak in the audience here wishing to speak in favor of the bill. Catherine Simpson. So, gentlemen, if you could give them some. Regina Abair. Tim Smith. Y'all could just introduce yourselves for the record, and then.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Simpson. My mother was Kimberly Womack. She was murdered in 2008 in Point Capee Parish. This is my first time at a Senate committee hearing, and the proceedings this morning have been interesting, to say the least. I've had to stop and ask myself, what is the root of what you are doing here? Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, what is the root? What is your purpose of what you are doing here? What you're doing here, your meaning. You are creating laws, creating statutes, Louisiana statutes. You are putting them on the books and implementing statutes. The citizens chose you, they elected you, they trust you, and they put you here to put law and order on the books. So what does it mean when any person knowingly violates your statutes or breaks the law over and over with no repercussions and absolute immunity? It renders the work that you do here meaningless. It makes you a vacant facade of faces meant to pacify the public and not to be taken seriously. But the law is to be taken seriously. In 2008, my mother was murdered. The coroner did an autopsy, and he declared her death a homicide due to blunt force trauma to the head. She had 2 subdural hematomas on her head. Her forehead was split open down to the bone. All of her ribs were fractured. She had cuts and bruises all over her body. The same day the autopsy was done, the coroner issued the permit to cremate. The Point Capee Sheriff's Office told us, me and my family, that my mother's death was due to a freak accidental slip and fall. And we believed them, and we allowed the cremation to go forward. The coroner was our last line of defense in saving my mother's body as evidence, and he failed us. He issued that permit to cremate, and we had no idea that my mother had been beaten to death, not that she had been involved in an accidental slip and fall. Had we known, we never would have gone with cremation. You see, what we didn't know at the time was that my mother was involved with a married sheriff's deputy whose phone was found on the floor next to her body. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. The murder scene was not processed. There were no fingerprints taken. There was no luminol sprayed. The mattress that my mother's body was on was not collected as evidence, nor were there any samples taken from that mattress. Nothing was collected from the home. The rape kit came back inconclusive. The forensic lab tech who collected my mother's fingernails did so with her own personal fingernail clippers, thereby contaminating the clippings with her own DNA and rendering them useless. The bottom line is that the illegal cremation of my mother's body forever destroyed any chance at justice for her heinous murder. At the time of her murder, that law read, if there are any suspicious circumstances or the reasonable probability that a crime has been committed, the coroner shall deny the permit. Yet he issued it the same day he declared her death a homicide. In any homicide case, the body is the most important piece of evidence, and like any other evidence, like a murder weapon or fingerprints or DNA, there is never any good reason to destroy it. As Mr. Guerin said before me, doing so also prevents any defendant from conducting their own examination and will rob that defendant of due process. Almost done.
Okay.
In 2019, KATC news station in Lafayette did an expose on the story of my mother's illegal cremation. KATC contacted East Baton Rouge coroner Dr. Bo Clark. In response to that, Dr. Bo Clark then turned to Senator Franklin Foyle to have the cremation law changed to match what he had been doing rather than changing his behavior to follow the law. That is when the last sentence was added to this bill, which is why it is so confusing. This is why it is complicated, and it is why we are still here today, still trying to force coroners to follow the law. What we need is enforcement. We don't need more laws. We don't need more amendments. What we need is recourse. We need someone who can force the coroners to follow the laws that you come up here and you put into place. In response to public records requests done within the past 2 months, both the Livingston Coroner's Office and the Iberville Coroner's Office said their doctors are more than capable of determining when an autopsy is needed. They don't need you to tell them. They said this. While a doctor may be an expert in medicine, he is not an expert in criminal investigations. He is not an expert in judicial processes. An MD is not a detective nor a JD. This is why it is necessary to have laws mandating autopsies and cremations. And additionally, only 15% of Louisiana coroners are not physicians. For years, many coroners have broken the law with brazen disregard and no repercussions as any other citizen would face. We need someone to hold them accountable. They block our only form of justice. We beg you to give us recourse. My mother was a paramedic. She was a volunteer firefighter. She spent her life in the service of others. She didn't deserve to be beaten to death, and she did not deserve to have her only path to justice destroyed via illegal cremation. On behalf of my mother, who can no longer speak for herself, on behalf of all the other untold hundreds of victims who have already been illegally cremated, please ensure that no other human being is denied justice through this method. Please ensure no other family has to face the life-altering trauma that my family has had to face. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for continuing to fight for your mother and having the courage to come here and speak with us. It makes a difference, and we are glad to hear how this bill affects or could have affected your family and will hopefully help others. So thank you. And in the meantime, Senator Kleinpeter, would you let Mr. Smith Tim come up to the table and as well, because we have some others who want to speak. Yeah. And if you would, Senator Columbus, it's Steve Baxter. Would you like, if you'd like to come on up while Ms. Hebert, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Regina Hebert, and I'm here on behalf of myself, my family, and my son Dylan McClendon. In regards to the cremation certificate being issued after the coroner's investigation, I have questions on exactly what a coroner considers an investigation. Every coroner is capable of making a mistake, and before I even get into my own experience, I refer to Joe Ross, who I have friended their family after my experience. He was found dead in his mother's living room. And they didn't do an autopsy on him. They did a field toxicology drug test, and it showed positive for drugs. Immediately, it was an overdose. Apparently, they didn't even do an external examination because Joe Ross was sent to the funeral home. The funeral home director found a bullet in his stomach. So, again, I don't know how to identify what a coroner's investigation consists of. I know I'm not here because I wanted to come hang out. I'm here because I made a promise to my son. And it was the same promise that was made to me by law enforcement, by DA, and it was to identify and hold everyone accountable for his so-claimed overdose. Keep in mind, 4 people were arrested in Dylan's case for second-degree murder. 4 people. My son was an alcoholic, and he was addicted to benzos. And he had just graduated from a 30-day inpatient program in Lafayette on September 15th, 2018. September 16th, he was referred to this sober living home that had all these rules and guidelines that they were supposed to abide by. Had I knew then what I know now, which is why I'm speaking, I'm not going to fail my son and quit fighting like I was failed. They showed up to the sober living home, and they did a field drug test on Dylan, and it showed positive for opioids. Okay? What if Dylan injured himself the week before and was possibly prescribed opioids, narcotics? Well, yeah, obviously that's gonna show up in a test. But what East Baton Rouge Parish Coroner's Office, or the association, decided to do, instead of doing their mandatory duty, which is, and I'll read, the coroner shall perform or cause to be performed by a competent physician an autopsy in the case of any death where there is reasonable probability that the violation of a criminal statute contributed to the death. But I'm going to touch on that real quick because 2 years later, when I finally got Freedom of Information request, and I'm reading that crime scene investigators showed up to process the crime scene. And I'm reflecting back on all these forms and documents that I'm signing, telling me my violent crime victims' rights. Found it kind of odd just for typical OD case. We didn't know Dylan did not have an autopsy. We didn't know he didn't, because it's the law. And by what I explained, by his findings, the significant petechial hemorrhage in his eye, the way he was found face first on the ground, blood coming out his nose, the lividity, I would have to question, or I would have to say a crime likely could have been committed. This isn't something that happens in 15 minutes. Because it's the law, we thought he had an autopsy. This happened November 20th of 2018, 3 days before Thanksgiving. We buried him the day after Thanksgiving. We did not go looking for a police or any law enforcement to fight this. They approached us. We buried Dylan on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. We had the homicide lieutenant of East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office call us, reach out to us, met Dylan's dad at the cemetery the day after we buried him, and told him that he had been reviewing the files and things were not adding up that night. There were signs of possible foul play. We're still in this fog, not knowing how to process it. The homicide kept us informed every step of the way. This was November 24th that he contacted us. November 30, he alerted us or informed us that a judge signed. He actually had arrest warrants for 3 men who lived in the sober home with Dylan. Dylan was with these men when they left to go purchase the drug and bring it back. The investigation was going good, and Lieutenant Hennett contacted me December 28th, and he told me Dylan's toxicology didn't have fentanyl. So then your wheels really start turning, because one pill kills. When you don't have that one pill, what is it that kills? He had such a minute amount of heroin in his system. The amount of heroin was below the cutoff level of 200 milligrams. He had 5.1 nanograms. So things aren't adding up. But the bad thing about this is we did not get the toxicology back until 4 days after we buried my son. An autopsy would have answered the questions. An autopsy likely would have me sleeping at night. Because for the last 4.5 years, I don't sleep at night. I go to bed and my youngest son is 23, and that is the age Dylan was when this happened. And no parent goes to bed at night without fearing that phone call. And I pray to God none of you have ever experienced it and never will. So when we have elected officials, my heart wholeheartedly trusted in that autopsy to give us answers, because the toxicology did not come back to warrant what they considered as an overdose. All of his physical characteristics of that night warranted an autopsy, but that didn't happen. So I'm here looking for heroes. I've dealt with zeros. I need heroes. And Dylan's not the only one. I just fulfilled my promise to him by taking every measure. And if it was to confront the coroner, or they still can't give me answers. To this day, Shane Evans has never, ever told me that the reason they did not do an autopsy is because in 2017, they rewrote their policies to indicate overdose victims do not get autopsies. Rather, they get toxicology tests. Dylan's situation is clear that that doesn't work. So I have a job. I have a lot of responsibilities, just like everybody does, just like the coroner does. But they have one requirement, and that requirement is a mandatory duty to constituents like us. We elected them in to do a job. They're supposed to fight for us, not against us. I'm a manager for one of the largest medical hospitals and groups in the state, and I have a requirement. My requirement is to live out our mission. And if I don't, I'm called out, I'm held accountable, and I pay consequences. Who do coroners answer to? Who oversees them? This has got to change. It's not a good feeling to go to bed every night and you still don't know why your son died. You know, after you've hired private investigators and spent thousands of dollars, you know. But because of the lack of an autopsy, we'll likely never see justice because we can't prove it. So thank y'all for listening.
Thank you, and we know, we can tell how hard it is for you to be here, and you are fulfilling your commitment to Dylan, and we thank you for doing that and sharing his story with us and your struggles. And your coroner is elected, and he is responsible to you, the citizens that elect him. And maybe Dr. Satanovich can help give a little more direction to who he's responsible for with the association or on the other side. But he's responsible for you, the electorate. I mean, you elect him, and he works for you. So I would encourage you to seek that route as well during elections. So thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Good evening. My name is Tim Smith. I'm here on behalf of my family in regards to Jason Smith, who is my brother. I've had two experiences with coroners in my lifetime and very recently. My older brother passed away 4 years ago, and West Baton Rouge did the autopsy on him. And everything was, fairly normal for what we had no reason to go look up the law then or what was a coroner's job supposed to be or that kind of nature. Come to find out, he was 54 years old. He actually passed away from a massive heart attack. We did not know that. So the family had clarity, and, we were able to, kind of pick up the pieces from there. What do we need to do to protect ourselves? Do I need to take better care of myself? And I'm sure everybody in this room probably had those thoughts. With my younger brother, he passed away in November. Jason, it appears that he died from a drug overdose. However, the differences between what the two parishes were doing to prove this is outstanding. I mean, it's remarkable. So Jason passed away in Livingston. Grady passed away in West Baton Rouge. So no toxicology was run on Jason, and no autopsy was done. As regards to how it comes into play with the cremation, as a family, we were trying to get Livingston Parish to perform an autopsy and a toxicology. Our line of reasoning was, how can you rule this death an accidental overdose if you don't have a toxicology? Well, we used a handheld urinalysis, and it told us that he had these drugs in his system. And I don't know about you guys, but I work at Dow Chemical. There's a lot of things you got to prove before you can quantify a statement like that, in my opinion. To me, you need to have physical evidence. There needs to be tests done. Give me the data. So we actually approached the Livingston Parish Coroner's Office, like, can we have a copy of his report, or the slip that actually said he had these drugs in his system? No, it was just a handheld meter. That's what we were told. So, in a sense, my parents are in their 70s. I'm the middle child. So I had to approach my parents to tell them that their youngest son has passed away. And the first question everybody asks is, what happened? We don't have those answers. The only thing I can tell them is that, we believe it was a drug overdose. So it's very hard to bury a loved one not having these answers. And I understand that, that there's a burden on the system because there is so many of these kind of deaths. But my question remains this, is kind of like what has been said at this table over and over again. The accountability of the coroner's office, where is it? Who's making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? But according to what I have read and what I believe and what my family believes in, is that the law clearly states if there was a criminal offense, you must do an autopsy, or you must do your due diligence to find out what happened. And Jason's wallet was stolen. There was illegal drugs apparently in his system. The family did not know where he was at. So to me, there is a lot of evidence that a crime could have been committed. But however, without a toxicology, without an autopsy, we don't know. And there's no evidence to prosecute. So I thank y'all for your time. Hopefully, everybody will consider that we can pass as many bills as we want. We can amend these laws. We can straighten these. And if you read the coroner law, it's a lot of language in there. But however, what are we doing to make sure these coroners are following the law? Because it's my belief and my family's belief that that law was not followed.
Our condolences again on your losses as well, and hopefully we can get some resolution and some guidelines so that we can ensure they do follow the law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Steve Baxter. I think you're going to see a similar theme here today. It's kind of interesting. We're here to talk about denying cremation, and I think our experience has been more about being denied autopsies.
That's what it sounds like.
These coroners aren't doing their job. They're not doing autopsies, and I don't know why. And I'm speaking specifically of Livingston Parish and Ron Coe, and I think it comes from the top. I lost my son a little over 2 years ago under suspicious circumstances. They tried to make it a drug overdose while they did just the cursory on-site urine sample, which just shows the presence of drugs. It doesn't show volumes. And he didn't do a blood kit, which is a normal thing that you're supposed to do on scene. Didn't do one. On the advice of a friend of mine who knew more about the situation, I pressed the coroner who was on the scene, which was Joe Harrell. I pressed him a few days later about that, and apparently he thought that was, I better go ahead and do that. And so he gets with me and he tells me, yeah, you know what, I thought about that, and I thought I'd go ahead and do that for you. So he had to go to the funeral home. and draw a blood kit, a few days after. Okay, so is that going to be the same as drawing it at the scene? I don't know. Is there any degradation? Oh, I don't know. But they have rules in place that they're supposed to follow, but they're not doing it, and they've gotten away with it for so long that I think they've kind of forgotten that they're supposed to do this. Suspicious circumstances. Was a crime committed? Well, if my son did have drugs in his system, but it wasn't what was initially said, it was low levels, and it wasn't anything more in his system than the rest of his friends had that night, who are still living. We feel there was foul play and a homicide involved, but we're never going to know because, there wasn't an autopsy done eventually, but I had to keep my son in another place for 90 days at my own expense, and I begged these people to do an autopsy, and they wouldn't do it, and they wouldn't do it. And then finally, I went to the chief of police of Denham Springs, and finally, I put enough pressure on them for them to go ahead and do it. But at that time, the vibe is, let's get this guy out of our hair and go ahead and do it. So I get this quick autopsy, and it comes back right away. Yeah, it was a drug overdose. Well, how can I trust this autopsy even? I'm not even sure I trust the blood kit. The whole way that it happened was that, they did it kicking and screaming. Why did I have to wait 90 days? There were so many suspicious circumstances surrounding my son's death. It wasn't a question of whether or not we should do one. A matter of fact, where I had him for those 90 days, it was brought to my attention that he did have bruises. He had bruises on his neck. There were things that were never even seen or brought up by this coroner. Now, the coroner who took the blood kit at the funeral home, I found out that he took it, but only after he was encouraged to do so by another party. So I think he felt like he might get in trouble. But he told me when he took the blood kit, and I found out there was 2 different times. So I went to him and asked him for the FedEx receipt that he used to ship the blood kit, because I found out apparently on that receipt is going to be the time the blood kit was drawn. Well, he knew that the time on that blood kit or that receipt was going to be different than what he told me, so he refused to give me the receipt. And I'm like, well, it's a public document. I just, and he's like, and he got angry with me, and he didn't want me to have that receipt. Well, we all know why, because it was going to show that he lied about it. What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Okay, seriously. I ended up getting it, but I think it was a version that they had ended up changing, because I never did get to see the original, only a copy. Anyway. So like I said, we finally after 90 days got them to do an autopsy, but I have no confidence in this autopsy. And since that time, there's been some other civil suits, and we've had some depositions, and there was just nothing, where he actually passed away. But it was totally a suspicious situation. This would have been a perfect time for an autopsy. So I don't understand. I know what we're here today for, but if we want to expand something, let's expand oversight, what are we doing here? Why is Ron Coe not doing half the autopsies that he should be doing? If I find the person who sold my son the drugs and he goes to court, what are they going to want? They're going to want an autopsy. If I hadn't raised hell for 90 days about getting, I wouldn't even have that. And so whoever was going to be indicted for the drugs, it'd be dismissed because they don't have an autopsy. That's the first thing the defense is going to ask for.
Yeah.
So there should be, the criteria for not doing an autopsy should be huge, because you should be doing one almost every time. You know what I mean? That's going to be necessary. So anyway, I just want that brought to y'all's attention that, this may require another bill or another amendment or whatnot, but the light needs to be shed And I'm not saying every coroner is bad, but what I'm saying is my experience with Livingston Parish has been horrific, in addition to the horrific event I've already had to deal with, okay? No help, no nothing from these people. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you as well. Our condolences on your son. And for all of you coming here and bringing this to light, it's on topic. It's a little off topic from the cremation part, but we understand and have sympathy for your situation. It's important, I think, that you've come here and shed light on some of this. And I encourage you to work with Senator Kleinpeter. The bill still has a long way to go through the process, and it seems to be in the right subject matters that there's some alterations that he could possibly work on through the process that might address your situations as well. And we do have, again, the head of the Coroners Association, Dr. Siftanovich, back in the back, and maybe he can, hoping he can answer some of these questions, because I thought the coroners were under the obligation, if somebody passed away under suspicious circumstances and they were under, a certain age, that it was standard procedure to do an autopsy on an individual, and that's what my understanding was always, and
Ours too.
Yeah.
so and I thought the family always had a right to ask as well, but maybe there's some questions that can be answered by Dr. Satanovich in the back of the room, or maybe he'd like to come up here and answer a few for us. I know it's off point though, and we have other bills, but maybe just because of the gravity of the situation, even though it's a little off point, if you could just maybe, without going into too much length.
The statute you referred to, Title 40, Section 2019, I believe, it's regarding child death investigations. It is mandatory in some cases for infants who die suddenly and unexpectedly without explanation. It's a mandatory autopsy. It also refers to children under 15 years old in that statute. But to my knowledge, I don't see any statutes that regulate some of the things you were referring to about age. It refers to...
maybe it was more natural causes, as somebody looked like they passed away from natural causes, I was always under the understanding that it was more of an age and natural cause thing, but again, that's my layman's.
I'll chime in on that, Senator. There are cases where we'll have a family member request an autopsy on somebody, saying, look, we want to know why he died, because there's brothers, there's sisters, there's kids. And in cases like that, we typically, because it's not, if it's not a suspected suicide, homicide, overdose, accidental death, then we will refer them to a private autopsy by a private pathologist.
Okay. So if a family wants one, I don't know what happened in the case over here, but if a family wants one, they do have a right to
Private autopsy. Yes, so because and I can't comment on any of the cases that have been presented to you already, because I don't know those cases. But when those cases do arise, remember, our job as coroners is to determine cause and manner of death, and if manner of death is something that goes into the judicial system, then we need to be prepared to back up our cause and manner of death. There are cases, when it comes to overdoses, there are cases, the overwhelming majority of overdoses in my parish are evaluated via an external examination and toxicology.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there needs to be more discussion on this, and it sounds like through the association, maybe they need to examine, because not all parishes are equal, not all parishes have the same ability. When I say equal, they don't have the same ability in their coroner's offices to do the autopsies, or maybe to the manpower to do everything, and maybe there's some discussions that
Correct. And there
sounds
is,
like need to be had about procedure and process and
yeah, and to be honest, there is a critical, the physicians who typically do autopsies are, it could be an internist, but usually it's going to be a pathologist or a forensic pathologist. And the national shortage of physicians who specialize in forensic pathology is at crisis levels, not just here in Louisiana, but across the entire country.
we do have some parishes who have coroners who are not physicians.
That's correct.
Correct. I
Because
think
they
10.
can't get a physician to run for the position. I do know we've had to address that in the past. But anyway, gentlemen, thank you for coming. We don't have any lights here, but we did have, I overlooked, we had one more witness wanting to testify in favor of this bill. So if you could let Miss Melissa come to the table, I appreciate it.
I forgive you. I know you see me all the time, so it's
The
hard to
card
tell.
got shuffled up in the
It's
other
okay.
cards there, so thank you.
To say that I thought I was the only one that had the experience I had in 2017, I'm mind blown right now. But Chairman Smith, Vice Chair Tarver, and fellow Louisiana citizens, I'm here today asking you to support SB 187 by Senator Caleb Kleinpeter relative to cremation of bodies. Sitting in this committee, at this table on this subject is hard. In 2015, I sat in the back of this room as my mom sat at this table advocating for survivors of domestic violence. Senator Tarver was in this committee, and I'm sure he probably remembers that day. Though I know some of what she endured, it was the first time she publicly mentioned certain experiences with me in the same room. I sat in the back left corner of the room, choking back tears. I knew I was blessed with an unbelievably strong human for a mom, but she even hadn't publicly talked before 2015, other than when she did the Angela Hill show in 1992. I'm proudly guilty of starting off the applause that echoed throughout the room when she was done, and now y'all know why. The last 18 months of her life, with 3 inoperable brain aneurysms and 1 behind her eye, caused by domestic violence trauma, were challenging. Thanksgiving Eve 2017, I climbed through her living room window after calls, texts, and even knocks on her door, noticing her night latch was still attached when unanswered. I'm sure you can imagine what I saw. It was brutally traumatic for me, being that it was the second time I saw her lifeless. The first was in 1990 when I watched my dad strangle her and leave her to die. She had to be resuscitated after that. The last time I saw her lifeless was nearly a week after her fight with domestic violence trauma ended, and I had to go ID her body. Though she was found alone and her death wasn't expected to happen that day, the quote-unquote gold standard coroner's office in East Baton Rouge only stored her body the 6 days they had her before I had Green Oaks rescue her. Though it was a holiday, there was plenty of time to take toxicology and to perform an autopsy, since the coroner's job is to determine what causes a person's heart to stop beating. No tox screen to check cardiac enzyme levels, and no autopsy to rule out anything else. They put cardiovascular as her cause of death with nothing to back it up. I have proof it wasn't heart-related whatsoever, and they put me through hell to get it corrected. If sitting coroners are unable to do their jobs and treat families with dignity and respect, even when a death inconveniences their holidays, weekends, etc., maybe they should be replaced by those who are willing to accept the responsibility of the office. Please support SB 187 so families don't have to endure additional challenges at the mercy of incompetent officials. And for those of y'all who don't know how I've spent Mother's Day for the last going on 6 years now, that's my mom's urn. And that's a picture of us taken at Mike Anderson's the year before I lost her. We were joined at the hip. Clark needs to be reprimanded for the not doing his job. I thought I was the only one, but listening to the lady that talked before me, I realized I wasn't. And what she went through happened the year after me. He doesn't want to do his job unless he has to be in the news about it. So he's pretty much forced to. And that needs to stop. Because I had to wait 10 weeks for my mom to be cremated for other reasons. But, I mean, we trust coroners to determine what causes somebody's heart to stop, even with everybody knowing my mom had aneurysms from being beaten in the head. You still supposed to do it, even when it happens on a holiday. I was in Walmart with my mom the afternoon before I climbed through her living room window. When they asked me when the last time I talked to her was, 8:01 the night before, will be etched in my head forever. And they say they compassionate to our families. I promise you they're not. So y'all have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Melissa. Thank you, and our condolences as well to you. Senator Kleinpeter, there are no more cards. There's no more lights to close on 187.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge all the family members that came up here today. Thank you all for coming to testify. I didn't know that we were going to have that many people that came up here. So it looks like we do need to work on some other things. I'll get with the Coroners Association and discuss the things that were brought up today. The main reason for this bill cleanup was that some family members did not want the body being held 4 to 8 weeks, and they were ready for cremation. And that was the biggest thing that I was trying to accomplish. So I asked for favorable passage on this bill.
That sounds like you maybe have some more work to do.
Yes. Willing to work
here with it. But members, Senator Kleinpeter is closed on Senate Bill 187 with the wishes of the committee. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Henry has moved already. Senator Henry has moved that we report Senate Bill 187 with amendments. Do we have any further discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that'll be reported with amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Thank you.